Hi, I'm Candice Lemon Scott, author of 13 books for children and one for grown-ups. A couple of my series are Jake in Space and Eco Rangers. Today I'm joined with Poseidon, the star of Eco Rangers, Pelican in Peril, and we're going to read Chapter 1. Chapter 1, Eco Rangers, Pelican in Peril. "Loser buys lunch," Ebony cried with excitement. She jumped off her bike and raced down the sandy pathway towards the beach. Jay pulled his towel out of the milk crate that was strapped to the back of his bike. He pushed his glasses against his nose and chased after her. Ebony was in the lead as she reached the shoreline, breathing in the salty air. She raced along the water's edge, her messy brown hair blowing around her face. She could hear Jay puffing along behind her, like a steam train. She glanced back, laughing as his beach towel billowed out behind him like a parachute. "Do we always have to race to the pier?" he complained between breaths. Ebony and Jay had been next-door neighbours and best friends for as long as she could remember. He was fun to hang out with, and she could always beat him in a running race. Without slowing, Ebony glanced behind her again. The grin on her face vanished as she tripped and landed against something hard. Ouch! She stared at her tanned knee. She had grazed it, and it started stinging straight away. She looked down to see what she'd fallen on. It's a metal drum, half buried in the sand, she thought. Maybe it's washed up from the sea. Jay ran past her, but Ebony wasn't out of the race yet. She picked herself up and took off again. "I won! Ha! You have to buy me lunch now," cheered Jay, who had reached the pier first. Ebony caught up with Jay. He was bending over with his hands on his knees like he'd just run a marathon. Then she looked up and she saw something in the water. "Oh no," she cried. "What's that?" Jay stood up. "You mean the cruise ship?" The huge white liner sat anchored in the harbour. Ebony still couldn't get used to it turning up in their coast town every few weeks, since it had started touring several months ago. It brought in crowds of noisy tourists who didn't seem to notice the nature that was all around them. And there was always a queue at their favourite fish and chip shop now when they went there. The conservation centre had much more work to do now. Tourists often trampled the fragile grasses that kept the dunes intact and left rubbish behind on the beaches. Ever since the school holidays had started, Ebony and Jay had been helping out at the centre with beach cleanups and tree planting. Now they were busier than ever. Ebony didn't mean the cruise ship, though. "No, that!" she cried, and pointed at the black sludge forming a dark, greasy layer over the sea. "What is it?" Jay said, grimacing. "I don't know, but we should tell the conservation centre," Ebony replied. "You're right," Jay agreed. "We have to get there straight away." "Then we could have an early lunch," he said with a grin. "Do you ever think of anything other than your tummy?" Ebony smiled. "Not really." He shrugged and rubbed his stomach through his t-shirt. "We need to see what it looks like from the pier first, and how far out that black water goes." Ebony made her way to the pier. She hoped they would know what that black stuff was at the centre. The sea had never looked like this before. When she got halfway down the wooden platform, she stopped at the steel steps to the pontoon. "I want to get closer," she said to Jay. Her friend nodded, and she made her way carefully down the slippery, wet stairs. Water lapped through the slits. She could see the dark smear more clearly now. It sat on top of the water. As Ebony reached the bottom of the pontoon, she noticed there was something lying in the corner. It was a black bundle. She stepped closer and the shape moved. She screamed and leaped back in fright. Jay came running down the steps, his trainers clanking on the metal surface. Ebony stood with her hand clasped to her mouth. In front of her was a black, feathered mound like a big, fluffy pillow. "What is that?" Jay cried. "I don't know. I thought it was a pile of rubbish. But then it moved," Ebony said. The two friends edged closer to it. Ebony could now see long feathers. Big solid wings were pressed against the creature's body. It was covered in sticky black goop, the same colour as the sludge she'd seen in the sea. "It looks like a bird," Ebony said. She walked up to it, slowly and carefully. She could see part of a long, peachy-coloured bill and one very large black eye staring straight at her. "It's a pelican," Ebony gasped. "Is it okay?" Jay asked. "I don't know. It hasn't moved much." She stepped in closer until she could almost reach out and touch the gigantic bird. Ebony had always thought pelicans were such interesting creatures. They looked a bit prehistoric, like something that belonged back in the time of the dinosaurs. She could see its big grey feet curled up under its feathers. It made her think of all the times she had seen pelicans gliding down to the water, their wings stretched wide. Their webbed feet would skim across the water, acting like brakes. This one was covered in thick, greasy black sludge, though. The bird smelled of petrol, like when her mum was filling up at the car at the service station. Ebony reached out to touch the pelican, but it raised its great wings, knocking her sideways. Unhurt, Ebony stood back up and shook herself off. "Oh, what are we going to do with it?" Jay asked, edging closer to the gigantic bird to see if it was injured. It didn't move, but just as he got close enough to touch it, the pelican opened its wings and Jay stepped to the side, slipping on the edge of the jetty. "Careful!" Ebony cried. She reached out to grab him, but as she grasped Jay's towel, it slipped from his shoulders. "Help!" Jay cried, falling into the water below. Ebony was left holding just his towel. She ran to the edge to see Jay paddling his arms in the water. He pushed himself forward in his heavy clothes, grabbed his glasses that were slowly sinking beside him, then swam to the edge of the pontoon. He pulled himself up the ladder. Ebony grabbed hold of his arm and helped pull her soggy friend up. He put his glasses on, panting. She wrapped the towel around his shoulders. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I guess," Jay gasped, blinking through his wet glasses. Seeing him completely soaked, with his hair plastered to his head, Ebony started to laugh. "That pelican's a menace," Jay said, making Ebony laugh even more. The pelican made a kind of crowing sound, like a rooster with a cold. "Did you hear that?" Ebony said. She moved closer again. The bird tried to stand, but seemed too weak to push its large body up. It slumped back down again. "Oh, I wish we had some food to give it. Anyone who gives me something to eat is my next best friend," Jay commented. "We don't have anything with us, though. Unless you have a fish hiding in your pocket," Ebony smiled. "Only these. No good for birds," Jay replied, pulling out some lint-covered chocolates. He picked a few of them up and popped them into his mouth. "Ew," Ebony cried. Jay shrugged and held out his hand. "Want one?" Ebony shook her head and crouched down near the pelican. She looked into its huge black eyes, and the bird stared back at her. It was as though it was asking for help, but she had no idea what to do. Standing, it would be nearly as tall as her. How are they going to rescue a bird of that size? "Stay still," Jay whispered. Ebony didn't move. The pelican stretched out its bill and rested it right on the sore spot where she grazed her knee. Ouch. Not a feather on its body moved, but it looked around as though taking everything in. Crouching in an uncomfortable position, Ebony was forced to move, startling the pelican, so it lifted its bill off her leg again. It blinked its eyes and made a low sound, so quiet she could barely hear it. "We have to get it to the wildlife hospital," she said. "And fast," Jay agreed.